a fun and much needed diversion to break up the regular gameplay, or an annoying distraction that just takes time away from the things you actually enjoy doing. Depending on the game, of course, minigames and RPGs tend to fall under one of these two categories. And sometimes they're just there and neither really good or bad. However, regardless of the exact execution, for better or for worse, I often find that a minigame's presence generally adds to the game's memorability. I mean, for real, who can think of Final Fantasy X and not think of Blitzball? The same thing goes for Triple Triad and Final Fantasy VIII. And hell, some people like Triple Triad over the game itself. When discussing those games these days, those two minigames almost without a doubt always get brought up. And to me, it's also hard to think of Breath of Fire 3 and 4 without thinking of minigames. They are abundant there. If we're talking more recent years though, the Yakuza series has become widely known for its huge variety in minigames. However, how they handle them is quite a bit differently. More on that later, but anyway, the point I'm making is that minigames are a very common thing in the genre, so I thought it'd be fun to talk about. So, join me on this journey as we take a look back at where JRPG minigames all began and go through each generation, highlighting some of the more memorable examples. After doing some research, I came to learn that the first ever minigame in a JRPG came from the original Final Fantasy. Once you obtain this ship, there's a secret minigame that can be unlocked by pressing a certain button combination a number of times. This just lets you play 15 Puzzle, a common puzzle game dating back like 100 years. Nothing that crazy, but yeah, being the first ever minigame in a JRPG, it definitely deserves some recognition for that. With that said, this is really just more of an Easter egg rather than a true minigame of how we would come to know them later on. It didn't factor into the actual game at all. That wouldn't happen until the Dragon Quest series. Dragon Quest 3 gave us monster betting, and Dragon Quest 4 gave us the first casino. You can gamble on slots here, and some other games. Casinos have basically become a staple of the genre and have been featured in near countless RPGs since this first iteration. My first introduction to them was through the slot machines in Pokemon Blue. Good old Nintendo teaching kids to gamble at a young age. Good times. I'm not going to talk about all the casinos in the genre as that would take forever, but yeah, just know that they're everywhere. Moving on to the 16-bit era, its early years wouldn't really give us much in terms of minigames. Final Fantasy VI has that one part early on where Locke and a bunch of Moogles are trying to protect Terra, but this is pretty minor. The first JRPG to really feature minigames in a more significant way was Chrono Trigger. The game literally starts off with a bunch of them, in fact, at the Millennial Fair. The best part is, they are completely optional. Don't like them? You don't have to do them. On the contrary, if you do enjoy them, you can do as much as you want. You can also play them again way later in the game to get some really important items. For being one of the earliest examples, Chrono Trigger handled this aspect really well. Now, there is a mandatory minigame with a bike race against Johnny in the future. However, I didn't mind this at all and thought it was a nice change of pace. That time period is probably my least favorite part of the game due to it being all gloomy and depressing, so having Johnny's goofy ass come in with the comic relief and fun minigame was perfect timing. Okay, so regardless of the exact minigame, the ones in Chrono Trigger are impossible to miss. For some of the ones in Super Mario RPG on the other hand though, this is not the case. After a certain point in the story, there's a secret minigame that can be bought for 500 coins if you talk to this one toad enough times. The game you unlock is Beatlemania, which is pretty much just a different take on Galaga. The background screen also changes based on which character you have in your middle slot. I thought that was a random but neat touch. There aren't any real prizes to be won here, however, there are some other secret minigames where some stuff can be won. All the games in the Great Guys Casino and the Goomba Thumping minigame are hidden enough that most players won't ever come across them. You can win some items here, but nothing that crazy. There's also the Mushroom Derby Race and Yoster Isle. This isn't exactly secret, however, it is entirely optional. Not all the minigames are optional though, with that said. The Midas River minigame, the Booster Hill minigame, and the minecart ride in Moleville are all part of the main story and loads of fun. All in all, Super Mario RPG handled minigames extremely well and in my opinion is still one of the better examples in the genre. And perhaps the most interesting thing about minigames this generation though was the origins of the fishing minigame. The first Breath of Fire kind of did this, but it's really just more of a mechanic and not a minigame as all you do is press a button. To my knowledge, I believe Link's Awakening on the Game Boy was the first game to feature a true fishing minigame. Breath of Fire 2 would then take this concept and do its own thing with it. Breath of Fire 3 and 4 would only flesh out and improve upon this, but I'll talk about those games and their minigames a little bit later. To this day though, fishing remains an extraordinarily popular minigame in RPGs and has been featured in countless games. Honestly, that could be a video on its own, but we're gonna spread the love here. With all that said, besides these examples, the 16-bit era didn't really give us that much in terms of minigames, at least for RPGs. However, this would all change with the PS1. Minigames in RPGs were huge this generation. One of the earliest examples on the console is that one dice minigame from Suikoden that I'm not even gonna attempt to pronounce. This wasn't really that fun on its own, but it did allow for an easy way to get super loaded super early on. Wild Arms also had some minigames at the Adelaide Festival. This is pretty similar to the Millennial Fair from Chrono Trigger, but not as important. There's various minigames to win items at, however, none of them are really that exciting. My favorite one is probably that game where you have to run towards a wall and then stop as close as you can to it without actually touching it. It's simple yet fun and kept me entertained for like 5 or 10 minutes. Now, these minigames were fine and dandy, I guess, but none of them were really that impactful. That is, until Final Fantasy VII came out and completely changed the game. Final Fantasy VII was a monumental title in the genre, and a wide array of minigames did play a small factor into that. It has a great blend of ones that are required by the main story and ones that are entirely optional. They know just when to implement them as well to not only spice up the gameplay, but also to add significance to an event while still making it make sense within the context of the scene. Like the whole escaping from Shinra on a motorcycle segment. This could have easily just been a cutscene, but no, they decided to make a fun minigame out of it where you're racing and slashing other motorcycles. This really adds weight to this moment and just makes an already cool and important scene even more memorable. It's also simple, easy, and fun, and never gets frustrating. That's one of the biggest sins that minigames can commit, I feel. If you're gonna break up the gameplay that we pay to play, do not make it overly hard or annoying to where it becomes intrusive. And for the most part, Final Fantasy VII avoids this problem really well. The snowboarding minigame is another great example. It makes sense within the context of the story, and it's fun. So fun even that the snowboarding minigame concept will be used again by later RPGs such as Tales of Vesperia and Trails of Cold Steel 2. The best part about the snowboarding and motorcycle chase minigames though is even after their segment in the story is done, you can still play them as much as you want at the Gold Saucer. Come on, there's no way we could talk about minigames and RPGs without talking about the Gold Saucer. This is one of the most iconic locations in the entire Final Fantasy series. There's so much stuff to do here. There's basketball, arm wrestling, 3D battler, that shooting game, the Mog House, torpedo attack after you unlock the submarine. And yeah, I'm not gonna list them all, but this place is just awesome. It's so easy to waste hours here. By far the most memorable though is the chocobo breeding and racing. The reason for this being that not only can you get great items and materia from this, but if you manage to breed a gold chocobo, you can gain access to the strongest summon in the game, Knights of the Round. This absolutely wrecks shit. It becomes like a sense of pride and badge of honor with the game. I can't tell you how many times I've read discussions online about someone beating Final Fantasy VII and then someone else chiming in with, "That's cool, but did you get the gold chocobo at Knights of the Round?" I believe this is the first time that an extremely strong item was locked behind a minigame. It wouldn't be the last time for the Final Fantasy series either, as they would really double down on this in some later entries. Oh, FF10, I'll get to you in a bit. But yeah, if I haven't made it obvious enough, FF7 was hugely impactful from a minigame standpoint. I didn't even talk about all of them either, like the Fort Condor one for example, which is like a tower defense variation and super in-depth on its own. After the release of Final Fantasy VII, minigames started to become a lot more common in JRPGs. Some developers really took note of this, Capcom in particular. They were just chilling in the corner watching the success of Final Fantasy VII and they were like, "So, you guys like minigames, right?" And then boom, Breath of Fire 3 became minigame central. These seem to be very divisive with fans. I caught some decent flack for saying how I didn't like these in our retrospective of the game, and in hindsight, I was maybe a little harsh on them. That was one of our very first videos on our second retrospective ever, so my reviewing skills back then weren't really the best. Allow me to properly explain myself now. I do like the idea of a lot of minigames, I just don't think some of them were executed that well. Like stuff like the wood chopping, I have no problem with that, it's simple and fun. And stuff like the crane minigame or the vinegar part of the Shisu quest though, boring and annoying as hell and I want nothing to do with them. Variety just for the sake of variety isn't always a good thing. Bottom line, if it's not fun, we don't need it, we're better off without it. I will definitely give praise to the fishing and Fairy Village minigames though. I never really bothered with these too much personally, but credit given where it's due. A lot of people really love these and they're quite in depth, especially the Fairy Village. You assign different types of fairies to different types of jobs and it's really complex. Anyway, let's move on. Xenogears came out the next year and also featured a decent amount of minigames. Lahand Village has rock, paper, scissors where you can win the RPS badge and that actually is missable. All you can do with this though is just trade it for a couple of okay items later in the game, so it's not really worth it. Especially considering it's entirely luck based and the odds of getting this is extremely low. There's the Bledavik Festival later in the game, however these minigames are just okay. The best minigame in Xenogears is definitely the 3D fighter. At a certain point in the game you enter in a tournament and instead of regular combat it plays out like a 3D fighter in your gear instead. This is a little janky for sure, but it's still super fun and very memorable. Now, Xenogears may have given us a 3D fighter minigame, however, Legend of Legaia on the other hand gave us a 2D fighter instead.
Bog Fighter!
Man, you gotta love that cheesy 90s voice acting. Interesting how he says Bach when there's an extra A at the end. I'm not sure if that was a translation error or what, but oh well. Anyway, Bach Fighter may look like a 2D fighter, but it's really just more in presentation more than anything. It's basically a glorified version of rock, paper, scissors. The palette swaps of Vaughn, Noah, and Gala are cool to see though. Suikoden 2 came out not too much later and gave us the cooking contest minigame. This is surprisingly in-depth, and I know it's a favorite among fans. The whole thing is very charming. I love all the little cooking animations. Thousand Arms also had a cooking minigame, along with some other random ones as well. Grandia didn't give us much in terms of minigames besides that deck swapping one, however, I always enjoyed this a lot. I mean, it's nothing really that cool, it just makes the shit part more memorable. Let's move on to another Squaresoft game, Final Fantasy VIII. As I mentioned in the intro, Triple Triad is a huge fan favorite. Everything about it was just executed so well. It's a card game that's really easy to understand and play. There's a grid of 8, each card has 4 numbers on the side, the higher number flips the card over, and whoever has the most cards at the end wins. It's pretty much that simple. And some of the rules do change based on the region you're in though, and that's in-game region, not real life. Not only is this just fun, but it also allows you to win some very powerful items through the refined mechanic. If you know what you're doing, you can become overpowered way earlier than intended and kind of break the game. Most NPCs can be challenged as well, which just kind of creates this funny world-building fact of how like everyone in Final Fantasy VIII is an avid Triple Triad player. Squall be all like, "Yo, Zell, is your mom home? I gotta go kick her ass in Triple Triad real quick. Tell her to keep your card warm for me, I'm about to cop that shit." The Triple Triad wasn't just popular in game though, but in real life as well. Bandai even made a physical version of the game, and the company DigiCube made this Final Fantasy VIII desktop accessory CD-ROM where you can play Triple Triad against the computer and against other players via LAN connection. So, suffice to say, Squaresoft had a real hit on their hands here. And what do most companies do with hits? Well, try to replicate them of course. Final Fantasy IX gave us Tetra Master, and this kinda fell short. One of my biggest beliefs with gaming is that oftentimes less is more, and this is something that Tetra Master did not do. The rules are a bit more complex, and it's harder to understand. There's also some RNG and luck involved, so yeah. The worst thing about it though is that unlike Triple Triad, which was entirely optional, there's a part in the main story where Tetra Master is required. You enter in a tournament that you have to win to proceed, and if you haven't been keeping up with this can stall players for a while. Triple Triad works so well not only because of its streamlined nature, but also because you never needed to play it once yet still were rewarded handsomely if you did choose to invest that time. Tetra Master on the other hand is confusing, it's mandatory, and the rewards you get for investing time into it are shit. That's like 3 strikes right there, they failed on every account. With all that said, I did still enjoy Tetra Master growing up, but yeah, nostalgia aside, Triple Triad was definitely implemented better. What 9 did do better than 8 though was how it handled chocobos. I don't know if these necessarily count as mini-games, but regardless, I did enjoy Chocobo Hot and Cold way better than the forest puzzles from FF8. 9 did still have some true mini-games though. There's the hip hop racing and jump roping, however, I never bothered with these at all. There aren't any worthwhile rewards and it's basically just for bragging rights. Thankfully, they're optional. The sword fight minigame is mandatory, and this one actually gives you decent rewards. If you manage to impress all 100 nobles, you get both 10,000 gil and a moonstone, a helpful accessory you normally wouldn't otherwise get until way later in the game. Now, did I ever do this though? No, impressing all of them is pretty hard. I did catch all 99 frogs in the frog catching game however. If you do this, you can fight an optional boss, Quail, and get Quina's strongest weapon in the game. Alright, let's take it back a bit to another Square game, Chrono Cross. I used to think the dragon feeding game was like impossible to hit 100, but it turns out that it's actually incredibly easy. There's no penalty for trying to feed a dragon that's not hungry, so you can literally just walk back and forth spamming the X button. You do have to stay stocked up on food, but it's in the same line, so yeah, not hard at all. There's also the Grand Slam tournament, however, I'm hesitant to call this a minigame. It's just a normal battle system, only with a team of monsters that you recruit instead. Dragon Quest VIII also has something similar. These are pretty fun, so I just wanted to point them out. Though I'm not too familiar with the game myself, Legend of Mana had a golem building minigame that played a pretty important part in gameplay. When doing research for this video, I saw this get brought up occasionally, and it looks pretty cool. Before we move on from the PS1, there's still one more RPG I want to talk about, Breath of Fire 4. Out of all the RPGs I've ever played, Breath of Fire 4 probably has the highest frequency of mandatory minigames. Yes, even more than Breath of Fire 3. Capcom did not hold back here. Again, I like the idea of minigames, I just think there's too many of them here. There's just one part where there's like 3 of them within an hour or 2, and it just slows the pacing down a lot. I remember thinking, dude, can I just get into battles and shit again? And personally, when it comes to mandatory minigames, I feel that they should be used more sparingly. When they happen as often as they do here, it turns it from, oh cool, a minigame, to oh, another minigame. Anyway, I already rambled about this enough in a retrospective of the game, so I'll stop. The fishing is excellent though, I will say that at least. These screens are extremely cozy and relaxing. Oh yeah, a town building fairy village minigame also makes its return. If you like this in the 3rd game, you'll like it here too. Alright, that's about enough love for Sony for now, let's spread the attention. Minigames were just everywhere on the PS1, so I really wanted to focus on them. Continuing where Super Mario RPG left off, Paper Mario on the N64 also gave us some minigames, though not nearly as many. There's really just that block jumping one and that block smashing one. These are a good way to get coins, but not that fun on their own. Thankfully, Thousand Year Door on the GameCube was quite a bit better in this regard. Piazza Parlor gave us some typical casino games and some more unique minigames. There's a plane game, seeing how far you can get as Plane Mario, the paper game, racing in paper form with some fan obstacles, the tube game, racing in tube form, and the boat game, racing in boat form. Yeah, these are basically just races, I guess. Still pretty fun though. Sticking with the GameCube, Tales of Symphonia also had some minigames, but nothing really that fun in my opinion. The Cat's Emotion minigame is just a memory game, the Waitress minigame is also just a memory game, and the Uncle minigame, while funny in concept, is also just another take on a memory game. The Scavenger Hunt and Green Light Red Light minigames are different I guess, but nah, these are just whatever. Bat and Kaitos has that one Outer Dimension minigame as part of the main story, and this is pretty cool. You can get some good items flying around in a ship, and it's got a nice atmosphere. Besides these examples though, there's really not a whole lot of JRPG minigames on the GameCube. Well, there's really not a lot of JRPGs on the GameCube in the first place, so yeah. Skies of Arcadia is often considered one of, if not the best RPG on the GameCube, but unfortunately it doesn't have any minigames. The GameCube version, that is. Yes, the original Dreamcast release came with an exclusive minigame utilizing the VMU, the Visual Memory Unit, which is exactly as the name implies, it's a visual memory card. After you go to Sailor's Island and talk to a person named Pinta, you unlock Pinta's quest. It's a really simple game where you travel around on your ship collecting golden items and occasionally deal with obstacles and battles. You can carry over golden items to the main game as well, which is pretty cool. Anyway, I figured a lot of people didn't even know about this, including myself before this video, so I thought it was worth a mention. Final Fantasy VIII also did something similar with the Japan exclusive Pocket Station and Chocobo's World. It could still be played on Western consoles if you imported the Pocket Station though, and it also could be played on the PC version straight up. I forgot to mention this earlier and just thought it was cool. Going back to the Dreamcast, Grandia 2 gave us this arm wrestling minigame and it was just okay. I think I like the idea more than the execution. Alright, I think it's finally time for the PS2 and its first minigame-heavy JRPG, Final Fantasy X. Yeah, you knew this one was coming eventually. A very common complaint with this game is that maybe besides Blitzball, it has awful minigames, but I don't know. I kind of like them, actually. I'll get to Blitzball in a bit, but let's start with the ones that people hate the most, the ones needed for the ultimate weapons. The butterfly catching, honestly, thought this was super easy, didn't have a problem at all. The Chocobo race to Remian's Temple, a little harder, but still manageable. The 4 Chocobo trainer races, okay, the last one is pretty hard, I will say that. It did take me a while. The controls are a little janky, and not only do you have to win, but you have to collect balloons while avoiding birds in the process, and it's not easy. Getting balloons reduces your time, while getting hit by birds adds to your time, and you need to get a total time of 0 or less. Yeah, I know. Difficulty aside though, while it can be frustrating, and I do mean frustrating, it's also still doable and very satisfying to finally accomplish. And given that it's for your main character's strongest weapon in the game, I'm okay with this. It shouldn't be easy to get, and it should feel rewarding. The lightning dodging on the other hand though? Okay, you guys have a point here. In order to get the Venus Sigil for Lulu's ultimate weapon, you have to dodge 200 lightning strikes in a row without getting hit. This sucks and is not fun at all. It's not even hard really, it's just tedious and boring. Well, if you're cheesing it, that is. There's kind of this trick you can do utilizing this crater that makes them very easy to time and dodge. Even doing this though, it still takes like 10 to 15 minutes of 100% straight concentration. Man, if you choose not to utilize your strategy, then, well, shit, good luck I guess. I can't even imagine how hard and annoying that would be. At least Catch Your Chocobo can still be kinda fun in a difficult and sort of frustrating way, but this just ain't it. Little rule of thumb, if your minigame can be played by pressing the same button over and over again, it probably sucks. Anyway, moving on to Blitzball. Actual minigame aside, Blitzball is such a core element in Final Fantasy X's identity. Final Fantasy X had a heavy water setting, so naturally a sport based in the water only made sense. It's like the very first thing you hear about too, as our main character of the game, Titus, is a star Blitzball player of the Xanarkand Apes. What the hell is an ape? The CGI cutscene makes Blitzball look so cool and epic, and then when you finally get to actually play it, it's like, well, maybe not quite the same, but hey, the idea is cool at least. Being a game inside of another game, it's obviously not the most polished thing in the entire world and can be a little janky. Again, I just love the concept and the ambition behind it so much though that I can give the execution a bit of a pass. Jankiness aside, I still managed to beat the Luca goers even if half my team was out here dropping more passes than Nathan Fielder.
Seriously, if I throw a football at you right now, you think you can catch it?
I could catch the football.
You can catch a football?
Yeah.
I doubt it. I doubt you can catch a football.
I love how the game gives you the option to either win or lose here. If you want to just take the L and move on, you can, but if you want to go for the dub, you better hope you got the jet shot. It's pretty damn hard to win it without it. Overall, Blitzball is a pretty in-depth system. There's a lot of moves to learn and people from all over Spirit to recruit to your team. However, there's maybe a little too much of it though, as in order to get the Jupiter Sigil for Wakka's ultimate weapon, you need to spend hours playing Blitzball. If you're not a fan of Blitzball, this is a total slog to get through, so I get the criticism here. Thankfully, I do enjoy Blitzball, so it was all good for me. I don't think it'll ever happen, but I do wish Square would return to it one day. How awesome would a smoother and more polished and fleshed out online version of Blitzball be? Just take my money, Square. After Final Fantasy X, the Final Fantasy series would steer away from minigames for a while. Speaking of steer though, how about the gummy ship from Kingdom Hearts? This is a Star Fox style shooter and has become a staple in the main series. It's pretty primitive in this first entry, however it gets improved and expanded upon a lot in 2 and 3. I was never a huge Kingdom Hearts guy, so I can't comment on this too much, but I know it's a favorite among some fans. Legaia 2 Dual Sog is another early PS2 RPG that had some minigames, though these aren't usually remembered super fondly. The knife throwing is basically darts and just okay, the side jumping is pretty simple and boring, and the rice planting one is genuinely awful. You have to press a series of buttons really fast and it's just hard. People seem to really hate this one for how difficult it can be. I saw a lot of comments complaining online when doing research for this video. Going back to the Suikoden series, Suikoden 3 gave us this horse racing minigame and I thought it was kinda fun. It's nothing complex, but for what it is, it's fine. Racing would return in Suikoden 5 and this time you would actually be racing against other players. This was cool too. Picking up where Xenogears left off, Xenosaga Episode 1 also gave us a 3D battle minigame. It plays out a bit differently though and is more projectile based. However, the most popular minigame in Xenosaga is definitely Xenocard. It's a card game of course and is super in depth, way more than Tetramaster and Triple Triad. It's a lot closer to the complexity of a game like Magic the Gathering actually. Obviously I'm not going to explain it all, but just wanted to give this one a mention as I know it has some big fans. Unfortunately, Xenocard would not return for any other Xenosaga game, however Xenosaga Episode 3 did give us Hackix, or Hackox, or whatever it's called. Sort of a puzzle minigame that can be played with 2 players. Kinda neat. Dark Cloud 2, or Dark Chronicle depending on where you live, has Sphida, sort of a golf-like minigame. When looking online, this seemed to be a very love-or-hate thing. Well, to be fair, I guess a lot of minigames kind of are. Tales of the Abyss has a really cool minigame by the name of Dragon Buster. Dragon Buster is an old action platformer that Namco made in the 80s that they sort of just remade here with a new set of paint. You can unlock some costumes for Luke by doing this, and it's pretty fun. The last PS2 RPG I want to talk about is Rogue Galaxy. I failed to mention any of its minigames when we covered the game in a retrospective a long time ago, so here we are. The factory is an item creation system, which is also kinda like a minigame as well. Gotta be honest, I never really bothered with this though, but I know some people enjoyed it. Rogue Galaxy's biggest minigame is definitely Insectron. Basically, you capture insects and raise a team of them to fight in chess-like tactical RPG battles. It's quite complex and a pretty deep system overall. I do think Rogue Galaxy sort of lacked execution in a lot of its ideas, but man, it was one ambitious game. Moving on to the next console generation, JRPGs in general were pretty scarce, so of course JRPG minigames were as well. I'll be the first to admit that past the GBA and PSP era, I'm not the most knowledgeable in handheld RPGs, but at least in terms of console JRPGs, they were definitely in a drought this generation. Earlier in the video, I already mentioned the snowboarding minigames from Trails of Cold Steel 2 and Tales of Vesperia, however, they did have some others as well. Besides fishing, swimming with your classmates, and that one bike race against Angelica, Trails of Cold Steel also gave us a card game Blade, and this is actually a lot of fun. You never really need to engage with this, and the rewards aren't really worth it, but still, I always found it rather enjoyable. Fun fact, this was actually first introduced in the game Brandish VT, the Japan-exclusive Falcom title from 1996 and the fourth game in the Brandish series. It would appear again in Brandish Dark Revenant, Tokyo Xanadu, and a slightly expanded upon version with some new cards in Trails of Cold Steel 2. In addition to snowboarding, Tales of Vesperia has that same waitress minigame from Tales of Symphonia, and it also has those dragon races with Ball, or Bale, or I kinda forget how to pronounce his name. And these are pretty simple, you basically just race the rings. The rewards aren't bad either. You can get some titles for Judith, a new costume for her, a nice piece of equipment, and the ability for Ball to land on ice. Pretty helpful. Sticking with the Tales series, Tales of Graces gave us Shock Cube, sort of a puzzle minigame involving cubes, obviously. It's okay. You can win some weapons for Pascal, I guess. In Final Fantasy XIII 2, there's a place called Serendipity, an optional location that has a lot of similarities to the Gold Saucer from Final Fantasy VII. In fact, unlike every other location in the game, Serendipity has a fixed camera angle, paying homage to the Gold Saucer and the camera angle style of the PS1 games. You can play standard casino games here, like slots and card games, and chocobo racing as well, which is pretty similar to how it was in 7. Kinda surprising it took them that long to try to mimic that success again, and same with the Gold Saucer-like place in general. I'm sure there are some others I'm either forgetting or not aware about, but yeah. Outside of these examples and typical fishing like in Nier or casino games like in Ni no Kuni, this generation didn't really give us that much to work with in terms of minigames. We would definitely see a resurgence in the following generation, and same with JRPGs in general. Let's start with Persona 5. There's the batting cages, always a good time. It's kinda fun, and there's some decent rewards to win. I'm a huge fan of baseball and played it competitively until I was like 20, so anything that includes it, I'm all for. You can play some retro games as a minigame, however, this sounds a lot cooler than it actually is. You don't even play a game at all, you just follow the button instructions on screen. It's pretty boring. The Royal Edition of Persona 5 would also give us pool and darts. These are exactly how they sound. They're okay. Dragon Quest XI gave us this one horse racing minigame as part of the main story. Even after its part of the story is done though, there are still some other races to do for some pretty good items. I found this rather enjoyable and better than most other racing minigames from previous generations. I don't know if I would really consider this a true minigame, however I do want to give mention of the crafting mechanic as it kinda plays out like one. Throughout the game, you'll unlock various abilities at the forge that let you upgrade your current gear or craft new ones. All the abilities have different effects and you have to manage your focus points properly in order to craft the best gear possible. You will be doing this a lot, so thankfully it's pretty fun. At least I thought so. Going back to the Final Fantasy series, Final Fantasy 15 has a few minigames worth talking about. For the first time ever in the entire series, there's fishing. A little surprising that it took them this long. Chocobo racing makes its return and it's a pretty good time. Controls feel alright and it handles well enough. There's a monster arena where you can bet on monster fights to win money and items. It may seem entirely random at first, but there are some factors to consider, along with some items to use to increase your chances. The last mini-game is Justice Monsters 5, sort of an arcade pinball game with elements of other genres. I like the idea and concept of it, but yeah, it gets a little boring after a while. Sticking with the Final Fantasy series, the Final Fantasy VII Remake also has a handful of mini-games, some returning from the original and some entirely new. Darts is new and completely optional. I mean, it's darts, so it doesn't really need much of an explanation. It's okay, and you can get a nice luck up materia from beating Wedge. There's a whack-a-box minigame where you, well, whack boxes. Different boxes are worth a different number of points, and you need to accumulate as much points as possible within the time limit. You'll have to strategically make use of all the different weapons and abilities you get throughout the game to get the high score, which in doing so, nets you some nice items you can only get through here. The water pump in the sewers and the robot arm crane minigame puzzle are also new to the remake, however, these are actually a part of the main story, and they're not very good either. Pumping water is just not fun, and while I do think it was cool that they brought the robot arm back from the original to actually do something with it this time, it was always kind of this mysterious thing, it's still just not very fun. It's slow and tedious, and just not what I'm playing Final Fantasy for. I've said it before in an earlier video, but I'll say it again. I've never played a crane minigame and thought to myself afterwards, wow, that was really fun. I'm glad they included that. At the best, they're tolerable, and that's it. The motorcycle minigame comes back, and it actually has 2 segments this time. While the original is more arcadey, it kinda feels more realistic and cinematic here. It is more involved, but I don't know, I kinda like the original more. I didn't mention this earlier in the video, as I wanted to wait to talk about it here in more detail, but the squat minigame also makes its return. This was such a wacky, memorable part in the original, so I'm really glad they brought it back and fleshed it out more here. It's just a rhythm game essentially, so it's nothing too exciting, but the set piece is great. I like how we have these jacked-ass bodybuilders who not only have a beginner exercise like bodyweight squats as a core part of their routine, but also that they can't do more than like 5 of them in a row without falling over. Like, bro, I know you didn't get that body doing that. Shit, if it was that easy, I could have saved myself a lot of time in the gym when I used to compete in competitions. In addition to squats, they also added pull-ups, this time with Tifa. And just like the real thing, it is harder. Beating Jules is tough. Maybe in part 2, they can add bicep curls for Barrett somewhere. We all want to see how he sculpts those bad boys. Dude's gotta be hitting the gym to maintain that build.
You're damn right.
I never played the Intermission DLC myself, but I did see that they added Fort Condor back to it. When looking online though, even though it's not super in-depth, people seem to enjoy it. I think Square was kinda testing the waters here to see if they should expand upon it more in the other parts. It looks like there's a lot of potential, so I'd love to see it return. Okay, before we cap off this video, there's one more RPG I want to talk about. In this case, it's last, but certainly not least. In fact, I think this last game handles minigames the best I've ever seen in any JRPG. Of course, the game in which I'm referring to is Yakuza Like a Dragon. To those that have played this should come as absolutely no surprise. All the previous Yakuza games could fit here as well, however, they're really not like true RPGs. Like a Dragon's the first time the series fully embraced the genre. It also probably has the best minigames as well, even though I really enjoyed that toy car one from the first game. I spent hours on that. Anyway, where to even begin? Oh man. For starters, there's actual complete retro Sega games you can play in the arcade like Outrun, Space Harrier, Virtua Fighter, Fantasy Zone, and more. In the sport department, we get golf, darts, and the batting cages of course. I mean, this is Japan after all. There's a vocational school where you can take tests on various subjects to raise your stats. Yeah, I know this is just school, but it was actually kind of fun to test my knowledge on some things. Plus, the reaction you get when you pass a test is just wholesome as hell.
Yes! Yeah! Ready? You're the man! You're the man! You're the man!
I've seen this play out like 100 times, yet it still manages to never stop bringing a smile to my face. If this was the normal response anytime a kid passed a test, I can guarantee you test scores would be higher across the board. Outside of these, the minigames start getting a little bit more unique. The movie theater minigame, for example, has you fighting off sheep to avoid falling asleep. It's kind of just like a rhythm game though, so it's not really that fun, but I do like the concept. Speaking of rhythm, how could we not talk about karaoke, a series staple? The actual minigame itself is fine if you're into that style of gameplay, but the real winner here are the incredible music videos that go with it. They'll have whatever character is singing to act out moments to fit the mood of the song, and it's just super entertaining to watch. And plus, you get to see all of your friends cheering you on. It's just a really wholesome atmosphere. Can Collector appears as part of the main story and has Ichiban riding around trying to collect as many cans as possible while avoiding obstacles. It's kinda fun, but not the best riding minigame in Like a Dragon. That title belongs to Dragon Kart. Yeah, this is just a Mario Kart clone. Not quite as good obviously, but definitely not bad either. It handles pretty well and feels fairly polished. Racetracks do lack some variety, but what do you expect given the setting? Anyway, what helps make Dragon Kart so awesome, there's a bunch of side quests built around it where different racers will come and challenge you. They're all pretty wacky characters and never fail to be entertaining. While I did miss a toy car pocket circuit minigame in this entry, this was definitely a worthy replacement. However, as much as I love Dragon Kart, my favorite minigame is Ichiban Confections. This pretty much took the place of the cabaret clubs from the previous entries, and while those were awesome, so was this. It's too much to explain it all here, but basically it's a business management minigame. You're trying to grow and expand and become one of the top businesses in the area. In order to do this, you'll have to buy out other businesses, recruit people to your business, appear in commercials, and even attend shareholder meetings. Only in Yakuza can you bring a chicken to shareholder meetings to appease angry investors. You gotta love it. There's an entire storyline built around this side quest even, where you can unlock an optional party member. If that's not motivation enough, it's also a great way to get tons of cash. I would spend hours on this and then be like, wait, shit, what was I doing in the main game again? It's so easy to get hooked into this. This is a similar feeling you can get for a lot of the minigames in Like a Dragon. How it handles them all is truly masterful. Outside of a couple examples, most of them are entirely optional, but most people still want to engage in a good amount of them. Why? Well, they're fun and entertaining. They feel satisfying from either a reward standpoint or just pure enjoyment. They really got the right idea of how minigames should be, entertaining but not intrusive. You should actually want to play them because they're fun, not just because you have to. That is why we play video games after all, to have fun. From simple puzzles that would only distract you for a few minutes to fully fleshed out activities you can get lost for hours in, JRPG minigames have certainly come a long way over the years. I may not have enjoyed every single one I've played, but hey, not everything can be a banger. The ones I have enjoyed though have given me tons of great memories, and I'm looking forward to creating more in the future. So, no matter if it's fishing, a casino, a race, a chase, or whatever, just make it fun. Alright, and that about wraps up this video. Thanks for watching everyone, we hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please either consider hitting that like button or subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. Now, I know there are some minigames that I didn't mention, and that's probably because I either haven't played it or I don't think they're that interesting or whatever, but still. If there are some good ones I failed to list here, let us know in the comments below. Also, what are some of your favorite and least favorite minigames in general? Let us know about that too. As always, just want to give a huge thank you to our Patreon supporters, and of course an extra special shout out to our top patrons, Derek Drost, Jesse Spencer, Jump Rock, and Saino. All of your support and generosity is very much appreciated. Thanks again for watching everyone, and hope you have an awesome day. This is Corbin from Gaming Productions. Until next time.